All right, welcome to another episode of New Wine UnCorked, and we are stoked that you're here joining us this Friday morning. For those of you who are joining us live on YouTube, I almost said Facebook because New Wine is also on Facebook as well. So if you go to Facebook.com/New Wine Do Wineskin, you can go to our Facebook page and hit like, and then that way, anytime one of our videos is uploaded or one of our articles or there's a discussion from a New Wine leader, and you're notified. For those of you that are on YouTube with us right now, just go right over to that the subscribe thing and then find that little bell that's right next to it. And then if you click that, that's the notifications. And then that way too, anytime that Phil or I or Phil, Jim and I, or Paul and some of the folks that he's meeting with, anytime one of our videos is uploaded, boom, you're notified. And so for those of you who have been walking along with New Wine, maybe through New Wine tastings or back beginning of this year, we had New Wine table talks, which now with the as the summer's coming to an end, we're going to start up table talks again. So be watching for that. But this weekend, for many in America, they enter the weekend, Labor Day weekend. Okay, so Monday we take off, and in remembrance of the laboring that has been done on behalf of so many workers. If anyone's ever been in the workforce, you understand. I mean, we talk about the people that have gone before us when it comes to rights and things like this, but what about the people who have gone before us to help establish the workforce, and this laboring that has been done since the 1700s in establishing what we have today. And so we've been talking about what does it mean to be a Christian in today's culture? What does it mean to engage culture? We have a ton of things going on with, mandates, mask mandates, COVID, vaccines, and, Northwest is experiencing fires and smoke from the fires. And then you have the Northeast with flooding, and then Southeast with hurricanes. And so there's a lot of things going on. But in the midst of that, though, there is good. I mean, there's good all around us. And so today we want to continue our discussion on, last week we were talking, Pastor Jim joined us, and he's going to continue to join us. So this week he's on mission, so he's out there doing work with the church. And so he'll be here with us next week. But pressing into, so if during Labor Day weekend, what if the church just paused for a moment and said, what are the labors of our love? What are we laboring for? There's this talk, Dr. Metzger has a blog called Uncommon God, Common Good. And so today's theme is sort of building from that, or asking the same thing, going back to our Imago Day. So is my labor of love, I'm laboring to love you for who you are, and you're laboring to love me. Are we doing it, though, for the sake of the common good? And when we ask that, though, is your betterment at the center of my common good? So often we talk about what's the common good for, the whole of us. But deep down inside, when I'm thinking about that, I'm really thinking, well, what's the common good, though, that most benefits me? And so Phil, in your work, in my work with the church, what are some of the things, though, that you've seen, especially with your work with the shelter? How is it that we can establish a vision or grab onto the vision that Jesus kind of gives to the church for John 17, this idea of us being having a unity, unified in our push to love one another? For you, for me, like, what would you say? I've been talking with a group on how to build unity, reconciliation. And the question is how do we do this? How do we labor in love to seek the common good for all around us? And what does the church have to speak into this?
Wow. Mouthful there again.
It's Friday, I got to get all my words out for the weekend.
That's true. We think about this stuff all week. But I think one of the biggest things is understanding that a common good is common. I mean, the same way we have common sense, the same way we have common knowledge, common good. What are those things that we would think of to be common good? Becomes the question. Does everyone deserve to have a roof over their head and a bathroom? They deserve to be housed. Do they deserve to take up that housing however they choose? Meaning a tent near my house or an apartment next door. I mean, what's the common good in that regard? Is everyone deserving of a meal? Those things that we see common, but at the same time, where we talk about common good, talking about common sense, is not all that common now, right? Things that we kind of assume to be kind of norms aren't norms anymore. Or we put the, I can choose to do this however I want kind of thing. So we're kind of losing that sense of common and shared anything. So that becomes kind of the start to it. One of the things with the people that I work with, it's kind of establishing, hey, it's normal to have trust. It's normal to trust people. And well, everyone's always burnt me. Yeah, I know that's a little problematic, right? Um, so we got to talking to what does it look like to build trust and have to work in this life where we share space with people. How do we trust people? So that's probably the biggest thing there is establishing trust and just working, not just with the men that I work with, but just in life. What is trust? When someone violates your trust, what do you do? And just kind of working from there, from a reestablishing that things are common that we share. So yeah.
Yeah, isn't that you said that, and I didn't even think about that, but to remind people that it's actually normal. Like, we're created to trust one another, and we flip the script. Depending on people's philosophy of life and how they lived. For Christians, it goes back to the garden. My son was asking me, so is the serpent one of the first truth tellers? And we take this serpent, Satan is the father of lies, but did not what he told Adam and Eve would happen, that, I mean, yes, it wasn't God who said, oh, that was concerned about, if you eat this, that you'll be like him. But what, isn't that true? Like, in the sense of the human brain, wasn't the serpent telling Adam and Eve exactly what would happen? In their minds, they would become like God, and while we don't recognize, we don't recognize sometimes that this is happening. Look, Jim, oh, see, this is a man of God right here. Look at him. So when he can hear us, then he'll be able to pipe in. But it was the serpent true, like, in the sense of, we got what we wanted, right? We become our own gods. And there's a difference between being a little God, in the sense of, like, what Jesus says, you are all gods. And because in the kingdom of Christianity, the kingdom mindset, we are kings and queens. This is our kingdom. But we live so often like we're the God of our own creation.
Yes, so that's the thing. Did the serpent tell Eve what, not the full truth, and God told God told Adam the ultimate truth? Here's what's going to
Right.
happen. That, so yeah, definitely that it's not necessarily that I would call I don't think I would ever call the serpent the first truth teller.
Or a truth teller, even, right?
I don't think I'm doing that, but I don't feel comfortable theologically doing that. But I do feel comfortable in the sense of saying, well, he told him, yeah, this is going to be the immediate thing that's going to happen. Your eyes are going to be open. You're going to be like God, not knowing what Eve, not knowing that there's going to be an ultimate and a bigger truth. Well, I guess God told Adam what the ultimate bigger truth would be, but how those things relate, and it wasn't going to be instant death like a video game or anything like that. But that it would be that there would be some steps in between, and then that trajectory of saying, hey, your eyes will open, you'll be like God. Your first step is going to be separation, and that's going to lead to death and our own islands kind of thing, and the siloed life that we're living now. So that's definitely a thing. But yeah, I don't feel comfortable calling the serpent the first.
Well, just like, I don't know where he gets this, where he likes to take certain things and just stretch them a little bit. Let's see how we can make people. Yeah, no, I don't. But this idea of trusting, like the fact that it's been flipped around, the serpent has made us think that we're not created to trust one another. Yeah. And so then when there's no trust, then how is it that a people who cannot trust one another can then be expected to love one another?
And I can't even put the full blame on the serpent on that. We've had a long history of being distrustful people and people distrusting us. So we have a long history of that, and reestablishing trust. And what do you do after your trust has been broken becomes as serious as the need for trust. So yeah.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting too, because laboring for love, we're watching this show, probably, I don't know if many Christians would think, oh, but it's a TV show called Damnation. And it's about this, they're using, obviously, exploiting the church and religion, but this one guy who's playing a priest, he's pretending to be a priest, and they're talking about religion and things, about how people choose, the religion in which they want to pursue, and that religion tends to be then self-centered. It's around me, and so I pick and choose. And ultimately, then trust is only about the people that are like-minded, that allow for me to get what I want. And so we've distorted truth, like what you're saying, Phil, is we've taken what, we are told truthfully what would happen if we chose self, right? And yet continually we do this. So how do we reestablish, so first, people's trust of this God, who they're wondering, because they look at the Christians, right? And they look at the church today and they go, but I don't understand that when you say God is a God of love, or God is love, I don't get it, because the people who supposedly are supposed to be the hands and feet of Jesus, they tend to be more violent hands, tend to be more violent feet, as opposed to blessed are the feet who bring the message of reconciliation, of peace. So how do we get people to turn and see God for who God is, as opposed to who God has been projected from my own being? How is it that we remind ourselves even?
Want to jump in here, Jim?
I'm just catching up on your conversation. I thought, I can't miss these brothers for another week, so I ran out. So I'm sitting in my car. I'm not driving. I'm just sitting in my car. So, what comes to mind, as I'm hearing about trust, and this, Matt. I mean, we did weddings. I did a wedding yesterday. You did your daughter's wedding, and it bringing two lives together. I mean, it's like trust. It's trust. And yesterday, when I was sharing with a couple, trust means vulnerability, right? I mean, it's you're giving something up of yourself. I mean, trust is kind of the surrender of power. And I think sometimes we don't like being vulnerable. Trusting somebody means becoming vulnerable. And for some people, that's a sign of weakness. And so, and maybe it's the giving up. And so when it comes to things like God, right? God asks us to give up too much. I mean, deny yourself, take up your cross, follow me. I mean, that's like, whoa, wait a minute. And so I think that, part of the trust is the vulnerability, being vulnerable. I think Jesus was definitely vulnerable. I mean, and enable for us to say, trust in the Lord with all your heart. But I think it is a vulnerability. I think it is giving up something valuable for us, or something, it's giving up power, really, I think.
Absolutely. And also, when we look at love, Christian love, when we look at God-centered, or just from the scriptures, we got to understand that the center of the object of love, the center of it, becomes God, right? And where he's the giver of love, we're responding to his love, and it's not cosmic Santa Claus, Lord, give me more, but it's us responding to his demonstration of love, and that he's at the center of it. So that kind of throws off the whole paradigm. So sometimes what you mentioned earlier, Matt, the violent hands and feet, is not from the response of, I'm responding to God's love. No, you need to fit into my box, and I'll love you if you agree or look at things the way I'm choosing to look at things. And so that ends up being the whole problem. And that throws off how we understand trust and love, not knowing that God's at the center of it.
Yeah, Jim, at one meeting of ours, or I can't remember where it came up, maybe it was a table talk, but you talked about being about like people and not about causes, or being about a community and not about causes. And that's a lot about trust. Do you find like that's some of the issue? I was discussing with a group of people on the mask mandates, and saying they kind of looked at me confused, because I said, too often I think the problem with this issue is that we're focusing too much on the issue and not on the people. And they were having I'm finding that people are having a hard time distinguishing the two, and so when you say not about causes but about community, or the thrust should be people and not, what do you like? How do you follow that up by further defining what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it takes a lot of work. Like with causes, it's easy to say, oh, look at the mandate, or look what they're standing up for, and look what they're doing. But to get involved with somebody's life, to say, you know what, it's not about Black Lives It's about my brother Phil, right? I mean, we have a relationship with Phil, and that's, I mean, it's taken years. I mean, it's basically trust. We've learned to trust one another. And so I think it's that developing of relationships. When I think about when it comes causes, and so causes is a short, discussion we're having now is what is it? Critical race theory. The shortcut is, I mean, there's a shortcuts. People saying this is what it delved into what critical race theory is. You're like going, oh, and then we're educated, right? I mean, it's just we're just educated about things, and we can have a better discussion. So I think the difference between cause and relationships is that relationships are understanding and educating ourselves is a whole lot harder than just listening to going on to whatever news station you like to listen to. Say, yep, I agree with that, and I'm going to let them define it for me.
Yeah, and being about I think too, with going back to your idea of surrender. When you jump into a community, there has to be an aspect of surrender, right? We talk, I've talked in my classes and even at my church, there has to be this letting go of self, in order to receive the person in front of you. And this is what I think Jesus is trying to get at when he says, die to self daily. That for me to fully embrace your personhood, that I have to be conscious of it. I have to be an intentional letting go. So surrendering to you as a person and trusting that as I open myself up to you, that you're going to do the same. And the hard part is, I think, is the vulnerability that you were speaking of, Jim, is that means that you can hurt me. And I have to be okay with that, and there's a strange, I think, transference of power that I'm actually giving you power over my life in some sense. And many of us are like, oh, because I would have guessed that 99% of us have been in a relationship at least one time in our lives where that power was misused and we were, crushed. Like, but why then continue to get into it? That's where the thing is, like, especially communities where a lot of times we ask ourselves, well, what's the benefit for me? And when we say, well, you become more of who you are, I think that just sounds too Christianese, I mean, the truth is that being in a relationship with the two of you does, based on my theological understanding and origin, a story of what I believe Christian is, being in relationship with you is necessary for me. Like, each one of you is necessary for my life. But so many of us go, whatever, man, you're talking this new agey spiritual thing when we talk about your personhood does matter to my personhood. Like Dr. King says, this network, this network of mutuality sounds so out there. But when you get into community, you start to realize, holy crap, I become a better person just by being around people who are not me.
Absolutely. And this, we're talking about trust and all this stuff. Definitely, we need one another. I mean, what's the first what do we say? We're first problem in the Bible is not good for man to be alone. Like we could first problem.
Amen.
The first crisis.
Right, first crisis. And so definitely, like, we know we need one another, but we do get it has to be a newer concept that we can figure this out on our own. The throwback concept is we need one another, but we are convinced that we can do this on our own. If I can figure out my household, if I can make enough money, if I can do the things that I need to do, then why would I need my neighbor? Why would I need anyone else? When we need people all the time, whether or not we acknowledge it or not, whether or not it's intentional or overt. I mean, you wander to the grocery store, someone put those things in there. You didn't put it in there beforehand. You need people. So definitely that's life, is that we need people. So
yeah. And I think, why are we trusting them? What is it about them that we're trusting? Is it the same ideologies? Because we share the same ideologies. I can trust that person. Because I remember when I became a Jesus follower in high school, I mean, some of the stuff I was saying, I mean, I had no clue. I mean, we went to church on Christmas and Easter, and we always prayed after every meal. And when we prayed, my mom always say, "Sit up, you're talking to God." I mean, that was the level of kind of my spirituality. But I mean, I remember having a conversation with, it was through the ministry of Young Life, my Young Life counselor. I'm going, Yeah, this thing about Jesus being God, I'm not sure about that. Come on, give me a break. Really? I mean, Jesus and God. And I remember saying that, but I mean, he didn't, at the moment, he didn't correct me. He didn't say, no, you can't believe that. That is wrong. He just kind of smiled and nodded because it's a journey, right? And it's okay, and so it's okay to be wrong or misinformed or, be part of the journey. And so, what are we putting our trust? What are we putting our trust in? Right? Is it our ideologies? Is it because they have to believe like me? Because, like you said, Matt, and also Phil, you know what? The richness of my life are being able to get along with people I don't agree with, who we have different ideologies that we can have different conversations about. And there are people, that are very, left wing that I trust. Not because they're left wing, but because of who they are and the character of the person. I have friends on the far right wing that I trust, not based on their ideologies or who they follow, but there's something deeper than that. But and so I think maybe that's part of the navigating. That's part of building the trust, is building trust with people that aren't like us, right?
Yeah, I know one of the things that just through college that I was learning more and more is just the notion that, yeah, there's people with good sense and true, authentic, love for God that does not look at the world the way I do. And they're authentic. I mean, I think more and more about the Buddhist potlucks that we were doing several years ago with New Wine. Um, there was just a lot in those conversations that were hefty, that was just good. And this is non-Christian perspective that some Christians would look at me saying, hey, why would you have a dinner and talk about faith and talk about God and love and all these kind of things with non-believers in this way and learn from them? And it's like, no, that they were actually giving me some perspectives on how to relook at how I understand Christ and what are the things that I'm leaning into that really aren't Christian. And they were helping me in many regards, because part of the thing is, in talking about trust, I think most of the people that I was in those dialogues with were hurt by the church somehow or another. So that now, responding to that hurt, this is the religion that they chose. And I was like, whoa, wait, some regard it was okay, I don't want to go down that road, but what are you learning about meditation? What are you learning about leaning into your faith that I can draw from? And that became something that helped me. And just learning respect for the leaders there too was very, very interesting. Being in a posture where I could actually listen and hear from them was a thing, rather than just throwing them off because, yeah, you guys are Buddhists, why would I listen? No. I was there to respect them. So yeah.
It's like you said that word, a posture, when we step into these situations and willingly, intentionally, right? You intentionally went to a barbecue or a potluck with a group of people that don't believe the same. They don't have the same origin story. They don't have the same understanding of creation or the absolute. And yet what they do have the same of is that they're human, and sometimes I wonder if we get back to even this simplistic, foundational tool or resource to remind ourselves that, but when you break it all down, like, you're defining that person exactly what you were saying, Jim, by their ideology. Well, those ideas are stacked on top of something, right? And they're stacked on top of a person. And so deep down, if we can begin to see, oh, well, they are a person like me, then the issues I think that we can get into are, well, what makes a person, right? Like the transition of female to male, male to female, does that change their personhood? If they decide to, if they're caught up in a relationship with gambling or with a kind of alcohol or drugs, does that change their person? It might change their behaviors, but they're still a human underneath all of that, right? And so how then, and I wonder too, when we're talking about trusting one another, again, is there a component there that when I can't trust you, that's saying something about my relationship with the Lord? He's put you in my life. If I trust that, can I trust that? Like, how can I begin to trust the Lord is actually in control? So how do we remind each other that actually obedience to the Lord is good? Because so often I see where it's easier to deal with people who are not Jesus followers. Oh yeah, well, okay, understand this is our mission, right? We're called to, but what about people who say they love Jesus, and then we're talking about a belief of Jesus, and I'm like, how? Wait, what Jesus are you talking about? Because there were people, on January 6th who are professed Jesus lovers, and they were going to defend their God in some sense in their country. Well, how do I come to that situation, regardless of if I'm for or against the people that were at the Capitol with the arms, or for or against the people who were saying that the people at the Capitol are, intruders and traitors? How do we then, as Jesus followers, come to understand the situation like that? That's very explosive. How do we put Jesus back in the middle again, so that we can trust what's before us? How do we begin to even have that dialogue as to what God is before you?
I want to turn it back on you, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely.
and say this, because you are being in academia, right? I mean, you're whether it's Bible University or the seminary, you are addressing, or the students that you have very, very strong theological foundations. And those theological foundations are built upon people that they've trusted all their lives. And really, sometimes, I think the important part of academia is to be able to both learn and also kind of I want to be careful how I use the word deconstruct, but to be able to kind of deconstruct, rebuild. And so, my question to you is, because you have all these people coming in, and maybe some people, when they see your arm, they're like thinking, oh, wait, how can he be a Christian? But how do you build trust within the classroom? How do you see these various different backgrounds, these different theologies, these, how do you bring them to a point to say, what, not everybody is right?
Yeah.
And so how do you build trust within the classroom, or even in conversations with other students?
Yeah, that's a great question. And what I've learned, at first I was, I would say, okay, well, you have to understand what you believe. And so you allow for you understand your belief. And then when you listen to people, know what you believe so that you can discuss those beliefs with these whoever's in front of you. But then I told the students, they said that was early on because I was confident in what I believed. Now, though, as I've gotten older and I've started to take in more beliefs, I start to realize I don't need to be so secure. Like, if I'm secure in the Lord, because that's my ultimate belief, that Jesus is who he says he is. And I have trouble with that sometimes too, like this idea that this man who's God and man and then dies for these, like I do, I'm like, I don't know how it works out, but it does, like for me. And so I trust that. And so then as I've grown, whatever age, life, all these kind of things, starting to realize it's not so much about waiting to then make sure they understand how confident I am in my beliefs, but more so talking through to where how we've come to our beliefs, and because people will use that precept of, I think they get it to maybe Thomas à Kempis or one of the guys, seek to preach the gospel, and if you must, use words. And like Metzger and I have been talking about that. What that seems to say is that we don't need word or dialogue. You just do, and which is great. Acts of love are great, but it denies the need for dialogue, And so what I've learned is that dialogue, though, in order for it to be truly what I believe, to go through the word from a Christian sense, has to understand the word as Christ first, and then the spoken word. And so how does he do it? He's shrewd, shrewd as a serpent, but gentle. And so explaining to the students, for me, it's a posture. Like Phil, you were talking about that posture. For me, it's become a posture of what I establish is love. Jesus sitting at the well, he still identifies what is holding this woman back, but he actually speaks to her after she questions, well, what are you doing here, right? Why would you be speaking to me? And that's when he then says, oh, you're interested in who I am. And so that comes through the dialogue. And so like with folks, I've had plenty of people in the church who, after I've gotten done with a sermon, will come up and say, I thought tattoos were a sin, Yeah. And so understanding, that's, so I think that dialogical foundation for me has really had come to fruition. And so with the students, I said, but in order to be in true dialogue, I have to not only be willing to hear the person, I have to see them and then make that space to embrace them, regardless of what their ideology is, but then embrace them as in person. So as I understand, well, what is this all about that the Lord, and I know it sounds uber spiritual, but really like taking every day and going, okay, Lord, how is this day going to be a day where you reveal yourself further to me so that I can understand my role in this thing playing out before us?
Yeah.
Participation, I think that's a big catchword for me, is participating in God's life and participating in your life, so we can participate together.
Absolutely. I know going into the job I'm doing now, I didn't come in with any like personal experience in recovery or anything of the sort. That was a thing that was pointed out to me first few months. But respecting the guys and seeing the guys as people was the start of it. Just wanting to understand their stories, where you came from, and being interested in that. But at the same time, being open about my story, about the things that I have trouble with, and just being honest with those guys. Now, with that, sometimes I forget where I am because I forget I'm in a drug and alcohol rehab center, and I forget that. I think that these are just brothers in Christ that I met at church or something like that. When no, for a lot of these guys, they came from very, very different places before they were here. So I have to keep that in mind. So it has to be a conscious thing kind of in the back of my mind, but definitely seeing them as people, definitely seeing their stories are important and they add value to the community, making sure that they know that they add value to this community. And we're just trying to figure out what that looks like and who they are kind of underneath the recovery work and everything else. Who's the person that God's calling out from this individual that's across from me becomes a very significant thing in how I work with the guys I work with too. So, yeah.
So Phil, I have a question for you, because what you just shared about even trust. Building trust also means, you made a comment, keeping in the back of my mind, and so when I hear that, keeping in the back of my mind, there's kind of the sense of like, I don't bring this out, or I don't talk about. I mean, so when you say, you are such like, whenever I'm around you or see people reacting to you or responding to you, or see, you're such an unarming person, right? And even in conversation, you're just very natural, and whether it's about life in general or whether it's about the faith. And so when you talk about, I need to keep that in the back of my mind, what do you say more specifically?
Absolutely. I don't try to remind them that they're alcoholics or drug addicts. That's the thing. And for every person that's there, I've looked at their case, I've looked at their stuff, so I know their history. But I don't remind them of it every time we talk. We talk about what is God saying to you now? What are you hearing now? And let's try to lean into that. Do you know how to respond when you feel God calling you or saying this to you, or something arises from the text? I talk to them like I'm at church, counseling someone, talking to someone just about spiritual formation. Those are the kind of conversations we have, but I don't hang over their head that this is that they're an alcoholic or they're a drug addict or anything like that. They're at a rehab center. And so sometimes that's where I forget sometimes that's where I am. So I have to remember that, okay, there's going to be a lot more stuff to work through. It's not going to be just, okay, after our 2-hour conversation, you're going to go home and do this. No, I can ask you to go do this in an hour and then come back and we talk about it right afterwards, where it's not like, let's talk about it next week. No, we're not talking about it next week. You're talking about it in 3 hours from now. And so that kind of thing. So I can push in some regards. I have kind of privilege to push in some regard and say, no, this is an assignment. This is not just advice I'm giving to you as a friend. No, I'm giving you treatment. That's
Okay.
what our conversation is. And so I don't try to push that on the guys, but sometimes I do. And then after that, we have a conversation and I try to kind of close the loop and say, hey, I was kind of, sometimes I'll say I was kind of forceful in pushing that, but did you learn from it?
Yeah.
And very often the guys come back and say, yeah, Phil, I appreciate that you pushed me in that direction. And I did learn. And now we're going to talk from it. So yeah, it's just something I try to keep in the back of my head that, yeah, here's where I am, but I'm trying to keep a lot of respect with these other grown men that I'm talking to, several older than me, different and more life experience than me. But I don't hang over their head that they're a person with problems until it's time to hang it over their head, because there's times where they need to remember. So, yeah.
I mean, that's the church's job, right? I mean, that's the church's job to remind people of how bad they are.
You know, sometimes, but honestly, at church, here's the thing. A lot of the guys I work with, they come to the harbor humbled because they've wrecked their life in so many ways. They know much of their life is broken. At church, I don't know if you get many guys or people that approach church thinking, my life is messed up. No, they're like, oh, my life is all right. I'm fine. I can figure this out on my own. And then you remind them like, no, blessed are the poor. You are the poor.
Yeah.
Don't you but that's the thing is like, so in a culture of a predominant haves, sometimes the church seems irrelevant. Yeah. Because you're right though, Phil, like I think there's a tension there of reminding people that they're beloved, but also that we're spiritually bankrupt, mm-hmm. And so how do we walk that fine line? Because I think we always need to keep in the back of our minds, right? Like, I'm but one step away from whoever I think I'm going to minister to, like so often we see the people that we go into love, and serve. Oh, well, we're doing that because they are in need. Well, absolutely they're in need, but no more in need than me. My need might be emotional support here to work through whatever issue I'm dealing with. It might not be because I'm one check away from losing my residence, right? That might not be my plight, but that doesn't mean that there's not a hierarchy of, oh, well, if you're in this category of need, then you're less than, And so that laboring of love, I wonder too, sometimes if there has to be something in there where it says, love the Lord your God, and then love your neighbor as yourself. So when I have trouble loving you as my neighbor, Phil, it says more about me and where I'm at with the Lord as opposed to you. And yet within the American context, we usually flip it around and say, well, let me tell you why this person's not lovable. As opposed to saying, well, what's wrong with me in not being able to love that person? Yeah. And so like, Jim, you're a super mellow guy. You come from a mellow culture, but how do you still press into that kind of stuff and push yourself and are willingly pushed by others?
You mean as far as just
and not being offended? Like for me, like with wrestling and stuff, it's all about like, I'm used to like getting on the mat. You like whatever. If it doesn't work out, you get grinded in. You're like, okay, this is, but that's more of a confrontational, and it's not. People wouldn't say, golf. And metaphorically speaking, Phil and I were talking about language before we even started today. But metaphorically speaking, the Hawaiian culture is probably more like a golf game as opposed to a wrestling match. Where it's just kind of, hey, you're going, and yet you're willing to press in. And so how is it that we elevate a culture like that where it's still super mellow, loving and embracing, but not offended when we have a little bit of confrontation?
Yeah. Wow, that's a great question. I think part of it is just how we were, raised. And so like for my mom, I think the key word that navigated me with as far as being Hawaiian is be proud you're Hawaiian. So understanding your culture. Our culture is about, the spirit of aloha. But also, I think, it's a culture, I think, that we just, let's just press forward. Let's just move forward. But I think, more and more as we begin to learn of some of the, the oppressions and things like that, that happen through the doctrine of discovery. But I think part of it is just trying to, in a lot of cultures, especially indigenous cultures, one of the things that really help navigate us is humor. Being able to laugh at yourself and laugh at the situation. And so I think for Hawaiians, we just navigated through, through humor. But I think for me, I've wrestled with some of these things, and the frustrations and all that. But I think it's the people who you surround yourself with, and speaking to the lives. But you're right. And it's important to be reminded, the spirit of aloha. It's respect. We're guests. Part of it too is, we're guests here, on Turtle Island, and so I think that's part of the posture. Especially for me, when we got into discussions, and I don't know what it was, but when we would get into discussions of, racial reconciliation and things like that, I was always really careful because I did not, as I shared before, I didn't want to share my story because I didn't want to impose my story, in other people's narratives and feel like, okay, and so I think maybe that's a little bit of, our fault. But, I've been given permission and encouraged to do so. And so that, that helps. So I don't know if did I answer your question?
Yeah, well, but I think it's the same thing that Phil was kind of talking about too, always keeping in the back of our minds, right? Like, not just keeping in the back of our minds, like the people in front of us, but keeping in the back of our minds, their stories, but our stories as well, and ultimately how it ties to Jesus. Like, Jesus came to right the wrong of each one of our stories, right? Like, our narratives tie into who this God man is, and so that's where we are continually pushing into. Next week we want to continue to stretch this idea of, well, what does it mean to be poured out for the sake of the other? And we mentioned it, and a while back we talked about, Jim brought to mind the doctrine of discovery, but we want to continue to do our own discovery as to what does it mean. So this labor of love, we're pressing in this common good. Is there a common good for the sake of all of us? So next week, go on, Jim.
I was just thinking of this as you're sharing. I think, even within my culture, part of it was, and it's a little bit, the Asian culture is like this, but it was like never shame the family name. I mean, it was about protecting the family name. And I think, as I'm processing and thinking through, it's more really of kind of a communal aspect of it, right? I mean, so, what my actions and how I do things affects the bigger community, the bigger Hawaiian group, right? And so I think that's part of the motivation of how do we approach things. It's how does it affect, I think, what do they call it, utumba, where they say, I am who we are, right? And so I think it's really kind of that. And when we look at the scriptures, it really is indigenous. I mean, it's a communal mentality. And so I think maybe that's for me what keeps me in check, because I think of my mom and my ancestors that have gone for me and how they navigated life, and I think of the legacy that I'm leaving behind. So I think it's what the communal, but also kind of what do we, what have we learned from our ancestors, and what are we leaving behind for our descendants?
Yeah, and that's what we want to continue to press into. And we'll talk about this next week. It's the idea of the one in the many. Theologian before he passed away in the 2000s, Colin Gunton wrote this book, One in the Many, and it talks about that, our uniqueness, but also our communal aspect. And we want to continue to present, what does it look like to be an individual who has particular and created like a snowflake, right? There's no one else like you. And yet, when you pull the three of us together, you see how similar we are, even amidst the differences that you can see. That the truth is we are more alike than we are different. And so what does that look like? And so on behalf of my dudes, Phil and Jim, I'm Matt, and this has been another episode of New Wine UnCorked. We look forward to you joining us again next week, Friday at 10 a.m. Here on YouTube. And if you miss it over the weekend, we'll throw up another video of this so that you can go back and watch again and glean, and then make comments the following week. So join us always Friday at 10. Until the next time we see you, this has been New Wine UnCorked. We'll see you on the flip side. Have a good one.